Welcome to CFO 4.0, the future of finance. The CFO role is changing rapidly, moving from cost controller to strategic visionary. And with every change comes opportunity. We are here to help you take advantage of this transition, to win at work, drive your career forwards, and lead with confidence. Join Hannah Munro, Managing Director of ITAS, a financial transformation consultancy, as she interviews key experts to give you real-world advice and guidance on how to transform your processes, people, and data. Welcome to CFO 4.0, the future of finance.
So, hello everybody, and welcome to this episode of CFO 4.0. I'm your host, Hannah Munro, and with me today is Bradley Channer. Now, Brad, as I've been instructed to call him, is the CFO of UBIO, and we're going to talk today all about the exciting world of raising equity and growth capital within Series A, and plus a few other things as well. So, welcome, Brad. Really nice to have you on the show.
No worries. Thank you very much. I was saying before, Brad, please. Bradley means I'm in trouble. So Bradley John, I'm definitely in trouble. And Bradley John Channel, it's my mother used to say when I was in trouble. So there we are. So no, please, Brad.
I will try and refrain from using your full naming you on this podcast. Don't you worry. So you've done a few things, and I am going to shout out about you won a number of awards. So obviously, last year you won a SEMA Finance Director of the Year, and obviously you recently won an Accounting Excellence Awards. And I believe you're also on the one of the SEMA councils as well. So obviously, as well as doing your day job, there's a lots of things going on in the background. But just for those of our listeners that don't know your background, give us a brief history. So, how did you end up at UBIO, and what's your work history?
Oh wow. Okay. It's a loaded question. Um, I'll just quickly on that. I'm a finalist of the Accounting Excellent Awards. It's next week, I think, or the week after. So fingers and toes crossed, and hopefully, but we'll see. So yeah, no, I have a very different. I've had a very different journey to get here, or to work in finance, to be a CFO. So I actually started as an actor. So I went to acting school and did kids television. Did a show called It's House, and I played myself in a character called kind of big monkey thingies on and made monkey noises. It was good fun. And it's not on YouTube, so there you go. And just before you look, and but no, I did kids TV for a while, and film and TV and musical theatre, and came over to the UK about 16 years ago when my kids show was cancelled. And yeah, bought a one-way ticket and ended up in London. Got a job getting people into nightclubs for £1 a person. Had 40 quid in my back pocket on the streets of Soho, and and then slowly got jobs doing marketing and sales while trying to, get into shows in between gigs. And then, got into the Royal Academy of Music, did musical theatre, and got to work with Stephen Sondheim and Jason Robert Brown and like big music theatre composers. Worked in the West End, and then got sick of doing 8 shows a week and taking home about 500 quid a week when my rent was 350 and my transport was 180, and then literally had no money left. And instead of getting a job in a cafe again or back in hospitality, I started my first company, which was an app called Free Beer back when smartphones started to come out. It was an app that gave you a free beer every day around London. It was an absolute flop, and anything that could go wrong went wrong. I had no business plan. I had no financial forecasts. I went into business with somebody. He was a lovely, nice man, but I didn't have the support I kind of needed, and I got some great scars. And I'm incredibly thankful for it, because if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have ended up where I am today because of that. But yes, I did that, and then I did a beer magazine on the back of that, and that did well, and I sold that. And then we took Free Beer to America, and we scaled it in Florida, and then we sold it to some people in America. Then I came back and sitting around trying to work out what I wanted to do. And I really loved startups, having had one and being involved in that sort of world. And I'd raised money for a number of them, so I was had a little group of investors, but I enjoyed doing that sales bit. So yeah, I started helping startups and young businesses trying to, as I used to put it, get their act together, get their shit together, uh, get their act together, and yeah, and that's where we went from there. So yeah, I was helping people do business plans and financial forecasts, and then helping them actually build these themselves because I learned this all while having my own businesses. And yeah, help them sort of get them and then take it to investors and then raise money for them. And I started my own consultancy practice called Accelerate Me. And I think through that, we ended up raising, well, probably for my whole career to date, I've probably raised around 60 million US dollars for that early stage startup sort of companies. And yeah, and then did some work with the Welsh government. And then, cut long story short, somebody said to me I was being an accountant, and I said, I'm not an accountant. I'm not boring. I don't wear checkered shirts, and I can hold a conversation. Because in my head, I thought all accountants were like auditors, right? Or because I didn't know any better. No, the people that I took my you know, did my accounts at the end of the year. I just didn't think I didn't think accountants were people that could do strategy or know how to scale companies or anything like that. And in fact, my sales pitch used to be to people, "Hi, my name is Brad. I'm not an accountant." And that was what got me by for many years. But then someone said, "Well, no, you're a management accountant." I said, "What's a management accountant?" And then I was introduced to SEMA, and yeah, went through that. It was wonderful. I thought it was great. And then got accepted on something called the CFO Gateway program, and then completed that, and then finally got my letters after my name. And yeah, and that was it. The rest is history. Been working full-time CFO for lots of, well, I ended up moving into more full-time roles from consultancy FD CFO roles, and working for larger businesses, from PR firms to other tech companies, and yeah, somehow ended up here. And yeah, I sit on the SEMA Council, which is like an elected position looking after the northeast of the UK. So it's the sitting on the Global Council, and then I also sit as the vice chair of the Lifelong Learning Committee. So we're looking at how we build ESG and AI into accounting qualifications for new students, and then at the same time how we teach our current members the knowledge that they need to have. I also sit as a member in practice on their committee, looking at portfolio FDs and CFOs as well. So do lots of consulting, lots of helping on. I'm one of these people who love to share things that I've learned because I learned the hard way, and I like to. So lots of mentoring of people starting their own FD CFO practices and portfolios, and how to pick up clients, and using the skills that I learned in acting school finally for something. Because I never had an amazing acting career, but now I can use those skills I learned on how to communicate to, people who aren't accountants, to CEOs, to narcissistic CEOs, to founders who don't want to listen, to the people who do want to listen, and how to have really good change management and to make differences. So yeah, that's how I ended up here. So I hope, sorry, a long-winded answer. So,
But a
but
great one. And I think what's really interesting is obviously, and for the listeners of this podcast will know that it's very interesting the different backgrounds that people CFOs are now coming from. It used to be, like you say, that traditional, somebody's moved from practice into industry, and actually what we're seeing certainly now, or maybe it's just I'm lucky enough to do that on the podcast, is to speak to lots of people with very interesting and diverse backgrounds, which I think makes for a stronger CFO function if you
huge.
have that
Well,
knowledge.
100%, and not just CFOs, but finance function. I mean,
Mhm.
I know it's not what we're meant to be talking about today, but I've a lot of the work I've been doing with SEMA is also on advocacy. So I've been doing lots of stuff with Westminster. So I've been working with the SEMA team on making accounting a STEM subject, which we've just achieved. So, but working with with some of the former breakout committees of the House of Commons, where we can sort of talk about the importance of being an accountant and how we're the glue that puts all the STEM subjects together. And we have more members become apprenticeships now than ever before. And I think this is the big thing for me, and the reasons behind it is to get how everyone has a different way. They've come from a different walk of life, right? There'll be someone who grew up on a council flat in inner city London. Now, their their view on the world and their experiences in the world that they will bring to a job in finance is different from me, an Aussie immigrant who's come over, with a very different background as well, but it's different to the next person. Now, if there's more people who come from more diverse and socioeconomical diverse backgrounds, they're going to bring something to our profession that we're lacking at the moment. And those people as financial leaders will be brilliant because they will have different morals or ethics or thoughts behind their decisions. So anyway, different conversation. But yeah, I think this is something that as finance leaders, it's really important to us. It's the future.
And yeah, absolutely. We will get on to the topic of Series A, but I agree with you. And I actually had this conversation. I'm trying to remember which podcast about. It was really interesting. It was a CFO that was actively looking at about the backgrounds that he had within his team, not from your typical diversity metrics, but race, sexuality, all that kind of stuff. It was genuine, like almost experienced diversity, and he was looking for people with sales and marketing background, those with maybe an analytics or business background and
Mm-hmm.
production. It was just the variety that he was trying to pull in was really interesting. And so I guess that kind of leads into where we're going, is that talking about like building great teams and building growth and scaling business. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's almost one of the biggest challenges, isn't it? Working with, like you say, founders that perhaps don't want to listen. So we talked a lot about communication already. So let's start with that. So
Yeah.
what tips have you got to share about building great communication with key stakeholders, whether that's founders, investors? How do you approach it?
100%. Thank you. Yeah, no, 100%. Funny enough, I'm blessed at the moment because my founder that I'm currently working with, or the founders that I'm currently working with, are actually probably some of the best. If anyone's listening who were a founder I worked with previously, I still love you, but these two are definitely the best communicators I think that I've worked with, and especially because I do a lot of work in tech, and before this I did lots of work in the creative industry. So like I was the CFO for a company called the Outside Organization once, which is like the biggest music entertainment PR agency ever in London, sorry, and they looked after David Bowie and those sort of people, which I have to say is really funny. There's nothing I can't, I won't say names, but there's nothing more entertaining than when you're on the phone on hold to someone who's quite famous who owes money. It's this really surreal, entertaining feeling, chasing up bills from someone who, yeah. Anyway, no, but 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 communication, yeah, it's incredibly important because everyone does communicate different. And it was really funny. My wife, I'm married to a psychiatrist,
Well, that's
and
a dangerous position to be
it
in.
isn't, well, it is indeed because actually, sort of slightly side story, but talking about neurodiversity, we've just moved to Cardiff, and she said to me, you got ADHD, don't you? And I said, what are you talking about? She goes, you're off the scale with ADHD. And I was like, no idea what you're talking about. Now, before this, it was probably, just after my last startup, and me sitting down and writing a business plan or doing a financial model would take months, right? Because I just couldn't focus. The TV would be on or something else would be on. Anyway, got tested, got medicated, took medication, and then I'll tell you what, overnight, business plans, boom, one day, done. Just my world changed. I think there is also a reason why now I am working as a professional in finance and accounting, and I'm a CFO. So since taking medication, everything just completely changed for me. But you're talking about diversity, neurodiversity as well, because that, you know, taking on that different side. So I see the world as an ADHD, dyslexic, slightly Tourette'sy CFO. I see the world completely differently to someone who isn't. We look at things from two different ways. And to solve a problem, the things I may come up with are completely different to what your standard person will come up with, just based on the way that my brain works. But communication, back to what you're saying. But yes, no. So anyway, married to a psychiatrist. She got me to read this book. It was a marriage. We just got married. This is the worst bit, right? It was a week into being married. And she says, we need to do this marriage counseling book. And I said, oh, come on. We've just got married. This is ridiculous. And she goes, no, no, no. We have to keep working at it. We always have to work in it, blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, okay, can I listen to the audio book? It's like, dyslexic, I ain't reading. And there was a guy called Gary Chapman. It was called The Five Love Languages. Best thing I ever listened to. And it talked about how everyone in relationships communicate in 5 different ways. And if we knew how we communicate, we prioritize those 5, and our partner prioritizes their 5, we can change the way that we communicate to get better relationships with them. So a good example is back in this day and age, I was living with my wife in a, 2-bedroom flat in Lewisham. And I would come home with flowers and she'd be like, oh, nice. Okay. And that was it. And I'd be like, oh, okay. Because I was a gift guy. I liked to buy gifts where I would make the lunches every morning because why wouldn't I? Because she needed lunch and I needed lunch. And then she thought that was just an amazing God's gift because she was an acts of service person. So the way he talks about, we all communicate 5 ways: gifts, touch, acts of service, quality time, and positive affirmations. So when I knew Jude was an acts of service and she knew I was a gift, she would buy me gifts and I would do things that were acts of services because they would mean more to each other. Now, I was sitting there on the bus listening to this, and yeah, I was taking it in for the relationship part, but I thought, this in business will be gold. And I've been using it ever since. So there's 2 parts to it. One part is this, where knowing who you're talking with. So if I'm just communicating, let's say to my one of my team on accounting, right? I know she's a positive affirmations person through and through. And I figured it out quickly. So anytime she does something, I'm on my, that was fantastic. Well done. Thank you so much. That was really awesome. Hey, next time we'll be able to blah, blah, blah. But that was fantastic. Thank you so much. So I lead off with a positive affirmation. And because of that, I get so much more out of them because of I'm communicating in a way that they understand. If I'm communicating to somebody who, you know, um, it's a slightly my old business partner for that first startup. He used to come into London from the Isle of Wight, and we would walk all the way around Westminster, just walk and talk. And I was always getting so frustrated. I'm like, why are we not working? Why are we just walking and talking? He was a quality time person. To him, it was the quality time together to talk shop and business where he felt he was that was how you communicate and the most productive. So now I make an effort to work out with all of my team and my other C levels or the people around me or my founders how they communicate. So I'm able to then change the way that I communicate to have a bigger impact on them so they will listen. Um, the other thing to think about, which I say to people with communications, is doing um, an acting exercise that I would do every single time I'd get a new script. And it's a Stanislavski exercise that Lauren takes further. And it's very simple. What's my super objective? So what do I want overall? What's my objective? So what do I want? So out of a meeting, what do I want out of this meeting? Because so often we go into meetings not knowing what we want from them. We just sit there and listen, or we sit there and we talk, but we're wasting our time. We don't know what we're trying to achieve by doing this. So I work out what my objective is. Then I work out my actions, so how I'm going to do it. Am I going to educate? Am I going to flirt? Am I going to instruct? Maybe not flirt, but like, what am I trying to get from, how am I going to do this? And then I work out the through phrase, which is 5 or 6 words, and this says exactly what I'm trying to achieve. So it could be, this is what I've learned, you know, and then that means every time I feel a bit nervous, anytime I feel a bit self-conscious in a meeting, I think to myself, this is what I've learned. Now, I now take this a step further, and I do this in all my written documents. So if I'm going for bringing this slightly back to, let's say, the investment conversation we're going to have around Series A, if I'm going for investment now, I would, when I'm writing my pitch deck or even the numbers, I would sit there and go, well, what's my objective? Who is this for? Is this for a bank or is this for a VC investor? Now, if you think about it, VCs only make money when you sell a company, right? So what's my objective? It's like, what's their objective is they want me to tell them and communicate to them how they'll make their money. If it's a bank, it's completely different. They don't care about exit. Bank wants to know that I can safely pay the money back and it's going to be relatively low risk. So by working out what my objectives are at the beginning of writing a document or a set of numbers, I'm able to then communicate subconsciously in that document in a way that they will be able to understand.
So for those of you that don't know what we do here at ITA, so we are a financial transformation consultancy that specialises in Sage Technologies, whether that is looking at a new solution, evaluating your current solution, or just helping you to get the most out of your current setup, we can help. But rather than me tell you all the reasons that you should consider working with us as a Sage partner or a transformation consultancy partner, I'm going to let our customers do the talking for us.
ITAS were there from the sort of get-go, helping us, talking through what the process was going to involve, setting expectations, making it clear that how much work we were going to have to put in to make sure that the project was a success at the end. And then talking us through all our different options, looking through our current processes, making us reevaluate what was important, which elements we wanted to move across to the new system, how we wanted to configure our new system, and also kind of making us sit back and really think about what is the success of this project. When we get to the other end, when we finish the implementation and we're in the system, what's success going to look like? And actually, putting that question back to us and really making us sit down and think about what is it that we are looking to gain from this whole process was really useful internally, making us really think about the key objectives and which areas to maybe prioritize over others. It was also really helpful sitting down and thinking about it rather than one big, huge project, actually splitting it down into different phases, sort of smaller bite-sized chunks, which made it seem a little bit more achievable within the time. And then thankfully, ITAS have been super flexible with us during this process because it happened to coincide our implementation with our first ever financial audit, which just took up huge amounts of our time that we didn't expect. So we did have to slightly push back some of our go live dates, and thankfully ITAS were accommodating and actually helped us navigate through that process. And I'd like to say that thankfully we're out the other side of our first phase of go live, and loving the move to intact.
No, and I want to dig more into that because I love
Yeah,
that
please.
theorem around approaching the meetings where you talked about the preparation. Now you mentioned some interesting terms. So for those of us that are acting novices, right? I did one play, right, and I regretted it as soon as I signed up because I was shocking, right? My sister dragged me into it because it was my favorite book. But let's not talk about that. So tell us
Oh,
through how do you prepare for that meeting, for that. What are the key stages that you would think about when you're planning out how to make that a success?
so I mean, look, I can use this podcast as an example if you like.
Love
So
to.
about 10 minutes before we came on, I sat down and I set an alarm for 10 minutes beforehand because I've done it enough times now that I can whip them out pretty quick. And I went, literally, here, I'm a little bit of paper here. And I just wrote on top of it, what's my super objective? And for me, for this podcast, it was to raise my profile in the finance community. Why not? I mean, let's be honest, that's what I would like to do. So more people know who I am, know my face. One day I might, be sitting there with, there might be, oh, we need a new CFO. I know a guy. Who knows? So it opens opportunities, doesn't it? What's my objective for me is to pass on knowledge that I have learned for my career, and also because I enjoy doing that, and it makes me very happy, and that's why I give all my time and do the stuff with SEMA. My action is to educate, so it's to educate and tell people what worked for me. And my through phrase is, "This is what I've learned," and that's it. And I've written on top of my bit of paper. Nothing else is within my eyesight apart from that, and that's all I'm thinking of. And then I'm just going to sit here and be myself and talk, and hopefully by the end of this, because I've done my preparation, people will watch this and go, oh, okay, wow, I've learned something today. And that means it's done. I mean, they may hate me and think I'm full of myself and an absolute idiot, but that's okay too. I've taught them something. I'm an idiot. But no, so it's about getting yourself out of the way by trusting you've done that work. Another example, I had a board meeting, when was it, a couple of weeks back. And again, before my board meetings, I prep. I know what's going to come up in those. I know if there's anything controversial or something that might be a bit, on the edge, or if not. So I work out what I want to communicate with the board. So again, what's my super objective, overall? Well, in that meeting, I know that they wouldn't have left feeling like this. What's an example? So let's say this is not what happened to us, but just trying to throw a better example out. So let's say that you're CFO of a company and you haven't hit your sales targets in a little while, right? So you know your board's going to be on your back because you haven't hit those sales targets. So your super objective might be to, keep your job. Because if you're the CFO of let's say a PE-backed company and you're not making sales, well, the CFO usually goes pretty quickly if you're not being able to do that. So your objective might be to reassure the board. That could be your objective, to make them feel reassured that everything is okay and will be okay. Your action is to reassure, and then your through phrase is trust me, everything is all right. And it's whatever it feels for you. And then if I went into that board meeting, in the back of my head, I would just keep thinking, trust me, everything is all right. When I prepared those documents, I would have thought, trust me, everything is all right. The language I would have used in the board deck would have been, we've got these sales in the pipeline. They'll be coming up next month and maturing in X months. This is the amount of cash that will be coming in. This will be the cash runway. This is da da da. So reassuring with numbers, things will be fine. This will be okay. And then when they read that, hopefully what they get from it is, everything's going to be all right. He's on top of it. Everything's good. Where instead, if you wrote it panicking, going, oh my God, everything's going to be, it might happen like this and blah, blah, blah. And you come from it from a different angle, they're going to look at it and go, whoa, 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 something's not right here. And then you're going to feel uneasy and then it's going to unravel. But if you're confident because you've done your work and you write your things in that clear, communicative way, and don't think finance. This is the other thing. Don't ever speak like an accountant to non-accountants. I mean, I'm sure people listening to this who are CFOs don't, because that's why they're CFOs. But if there are any people listening to who want to become CFOs and are maybe FDs or finance managers and want to take that next step, stop sounding like an accountant. Speak in normal language that the people who are your founders or board members can understand what the hell you are talking about. Don't talk about the capitalization of software costs because that's going to mean nothing to them. Say that you're putting them on the balance sheet because because it's an asset and you can write them off for a period of time. Yeah, it will make the company more profitable, but it's okay. We don't have to pay tax on it for a little while because we have lots of losses and we can get that money back on the tax return. So it's just relaxing them and saying it in a way that makes you knowledgeable. You look more knowledgeable talking like a human than you do talking like an accountant in a language they don't understand.
I think that's a great shout, and to be fair, I think it's great for some CFOs as well to really think that through, because it can be, especially at those top levels, you can assume that people in the boardroom actually understand a lot of the technical job, and it is genuinely amazing how many people don't understand.
And that is so true. Especially, I've worked with some CFOs, and I won't name them, of course, but older ones. And this is the difference in generations. I will also add as well. There was a time and place, and this is not an insult to an older CFO. I'm not doing that because I know you guys know more than I probably will ever know because you've got 40 years more experience than I do. But there is an older generation who don't understand technology, especially, and they fake it a lot, and they are just there was a great article written by a serial entrepreneur. Wish I had the article up. I'll remember his name, but he's one of the founders of LinkedIn, and he writes these pieces. And there was one he wrote called about founders mode, and my current founder gave it to me to read, and it was just talking about the when we are a scaling company, we feel that we want to surround ourselves by people that are the best at what they do. They know everything, and then we can rely on them to be the best at their roles to do their jobs. And he was saying that some of the reasons why some of these really big companies start to fall apart when they really start to scale is because they were bad hires, those people that are absolutely full of shit. So it's like hiring the CFO who worked at Target, right? Who had this massive name, but actually didn't really understand much about the finance in today's day and age. But by the way, I don't know who the CFO of Target is. I was pulling it out of my house. I'm trying to have a big brand name, but it's that sort of throwing people with really big logos behind them into roles because you think they'll be the best for you. That's the moral of the story but they're not necessarily the right people for those roles. So you have to surround yourself by people who understand how to grow and scale companies. And even as that company grows and scales, as a CEO, you still got to have a big say in how it's growing and scaling in all those different departments, not just sitting back and going, I'm going to let product get on with it. They know what they're doing, because they kind of do, but it's still, as any sort of scale up, the founder and their their baby, it's still their baby. It's still them. It's coming out of them. So they've got to be heavily involved in how that product market fit works, because they're the ones who set it up, because it's their brainchild, because they know exactly where it fits. You can't rely on someone else to kind of do that. So anyway, it was a really interesting article. Google it.
It
Anyone who's
is.
interested in listening.
And there is a piece, isn't there, about cultural fit in terms of size of company? Because you're right, there is this assumption that just because somebody comes from a big company that they execute better, they know all of
Oh,
this amazing stuff. But startup and fast growth is is almost a skill set in itself in terms of working in that. And if we think about sort of some of the skills to success, and even think about the process of raising funding, that is very different in that sort of seed to series A to series B
and
than it is in a massive company. And so let's actually make sure we do cover this on the podcast at some point,
we
because there's
definitely
so
will.
much we can talk about.
But just,
Let's talk about that as a piece. Like, what are some of the things
yeah,
you've
yeah.
learned over the years about going from seed to series A to series, so the next step up, series B? What are some of the mistakes you've perhaps seen made, and what would you do differently?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, where do I start? It's also how I learned in my career, was other people's mistakes as well as my own. But yeah, I mean, first of all, as there's CFOs listening, if there's a CFO who wants to get into this early stage tech bit, as a CFO of any sort of scale up or early stage company, you've got to know little bits of everything. Um, we're talking about the sort of picking those right people for the roles, and there's nothing more frustrating. And I'm sure other people who are similar sort of positions to me out there listening to this will agree, when some recruiters who will sit there and go, oh, they want someone with big four experience. And then you sit there and you're like, what are you talking about? They're experts. I mean, it's not all big four people. I'm far stereotyping, but the majority are very good at being a cog. In a very big wheel, they're very good at being a cog. As a CFO of a scale up, you cannot be a cog. You are doing everything from being able to use being able to use any ERP system. You are doing anything, being able to use any ERP system, from, a small one to a large one, to being able to know how they work, to be able to do an EMI tax relief scheme, to being able to do employment contracts. It's like, under my role, I do operations. I'm now just taking over legal, HR, and they all sit under me. You've got to know little bits of everything, because it's companies this size. You have a very large portfolio of work to do, and that's I think one of the biggest, is, taking on a CF. If there's any founders listening, you take on a CFO too late, and you're trying to scale and raise money, and there's not enough left in the tank. Sometimes it could be too late. So I think it's one of the second most important position in the company. It's the right hand man to the CEO, or the founder, or woman, the founder. To be honest, that's probably one of the biggest reasons why things don't work out. I always find, is especially when I would come into a company, if it didn't work out, it's because I came in too late, because the damage was done, and to reverse that damage is very difficult. Um, when raising money, I think the most important thing is, I have a saying that it's an investor's job to invest. If investors or banks don't invest, they don't make money. It's that simple. Um, as founders and CFOs and C-suites, it is our job to get that company in a position that is investable. Now, sometimes that's not popular. And if it stops the vision of the founders or the company to make it investable, then there's two things to say. One, either it's not the right investor, and that's fine. We go out and keep looking for that person, even though it might be a lot harder. Or B, which is not wrong at all, it's just not an investable business. There's going to be slower growth. It won't rely on equity. We're going to have to try to grow it naturally and get debt financing eventually, and then grow it that way. And that's fine too. There's nothing wrong with that type of business. It's just not going to be a high growth, fast paced, scalable company. And finding the right investor is also incredibly important. The amount of companies that I've done work for who have lied to an investor to get investment or deceived an investor, not deliberately, well, yes, deliberately, cut the BS. Like they wanted money, right? And they were right what they needed to write to get that money. It's great at the time and you get that money. Yay. Then the problem is you've now fallen out with that investor. They hate you. They don't want to work with you. They don't trust you. Then someone like me comes into a boardroom having to try to, get rid of this animosity and anger in the room. And more importantly, your investors are some kind of like they are your business partners. You need to work with them, and you want them rooting for you and doing everything they can to help you and give you money when you need it for your next round. But if they feel deceived or misled when they made their initial investment, they're not going to follow on. And then when I go to other investors and say, we're looking to raise money, they say, well, why aren't the old investors following on? And it's a small little world and it's a small little community. And they go to those investors and say, why aren't you following on? And they say, oh, because they're full of shit and they lied to me when we did this initial investment. And you're like, well, I'm not putting my money in then. So it's really important to find the right investors and find that either will support you or not support you if you just want their money. But I always say it comes to that little black book. UBIO, who I work for now, and I'm sure they don't mind me sharing this, Marcus was really good at raising money. And he has some amazing, what I call smart money investors on the books. People who came with 3 or 4 contracts because they had those connections. And we grew as a company because of our investors. Now that's worth more than maybe the 25, 50 grand that person put in. We probably made millions in contracts because of it. So small little things, getting the right people on your cap table and communicating with them and keep communicating with them, whether it be good or bad, is worth it in the long run. And just don't lie. It's not worth it. You'll be caught out. It's, I was going to say, and the other one we talked about briefly before as well is valuations. This is a common mistake that a lot of people make. The first common one that people try not to make, I suppose, is undervaluating oneself. People always like to have a really high valuation. They always go in and say, oh, well, because obviously if you undervalue yourself and you say you're only worth $1 million, well, then you're going to sell a large chunk of equity for your small amount of seed capital that you need at that early doors. And then you're going to have to raise probably another round of seed capital and maybe a Series A and hope maybe even a Series B. And by the time you get that far along, the founders are going to have such little equity left in the business because they would have had to continually, because they gave away so much at the beginning. They have such a little bit, there's nothing in it to really keep them going. Good option scheme can kind of somewhat make that back, but investors still sometimes don't want to be diluted that much, depending on how big the cap table is at that point. So it's really important at early stage to make sure you don't give away equity to the wrong people. Someone who helps you, I don't know, write your business plan is not worthy of 10% of your company, right? You can give them some options or something, but you've got to protect that equity at the early stage at all bloody costs, and you've got to not undersell yourself. However, the other problem is the other way, and this is the one that people don't think about. They overvalue themselves. Now, great examples are looking at things that happened post crowdfunding. Have a look at a business. Crowdfunding, I think about 7, 8, 9 years ago, when it all became really cool, sexy, and hip. Oh God, I sound old when I said hip. In the old days, but their valuations got stupid, like absolutely stupid. West Coast America, San Francisco valuations off the chart. Now there was this sort of problem came to me when I was listening to that story. It was a while ago. There was a company that raised in San Francisco at a £1 billion valuation. It was an idea phase, didn't even have an MVP. All right, sold it on hype and sexiness and sold it to his friends who were some of these big investors on the West Coast, right? Now, that all sounded great. Now, it didn't last very long because, like any of these businesses, you're going to need to raise money pretty quickly afterwards because people always underestimate how much money it costs to actually scale and start to get going in a company. Now, a billion is a bit over exaggerant, but even to someone who raises money at like, 50 million pound valuation, but is only turning over 5-6 million ARR. The problem is to get to that next stage of investment, you are going to have to achieve something amazing. So when you're selling something and you're just starting out, you haven't made sales or you've barely made sales, there's an easy excuse to make going, yes, but we need this money to scale. That's why. You give us this money at this valuation because the tech is worth 50 million pounds. That's why you're going to buy in at 50 million pounds. At this crazy valuation of, what we think we're going to sell because we've never actually sold this yet to know what the market will be like. And that's why. Now, the problem is we always over-egg that. Everyone always over-eggs that. Everyone always thinks they're going to turn over 10 million in their first year. And then let's just say you said you're going to have 10 million ARR at the end of your first year. It's a 5 times valuation. It's a 50 million valuation. It's pretty low. It's meant to be 8. We're taking 3 off for the risk, but this is where we'll be. People may buy into that. The problem is achieving that amount of ARR in your first year when you don't even know how people are going to buy your product yet is almost impossible. And that's the problem. You get to the end of your first year, you've only achieved 2 million ARR and you need money again. You're going broke because you spent more cash to get to that point than you thought. And you go, I need to raise money. You go to your investors and they say, okay, well, you had a 50 million valuation. So how much are we going to raise and what's the valuation? And you're like, oh, well, I've got to go up. So 60 million. And they're like, but you've only turned over 1 million ARR. That's 60 times. You're really only worth 8 million. But I bought you at 50. So those investors are, so you've got this, you're going to have to do a down round, upset all of your investors, or they're going to lose their money. And at that point, if you have a good big name investor, then you're probably going to be, you might be half the C-suite will be gone at that point. And they will pull your pants down and they will literally try to take either a large chunk of your company if they still believe in the tech and take more control over it, or they're going with strict measurements. Or you've just got the slippery slope that goes to nowhere, which I've also seen where we raise 1 million here and another million a couple of months later, but it's still not enough to really hit the scale that you need. So that's the other danger. And then it gets even worse when you get to exit, because you might find that this company would never be worth over 50 million in the long run. And that's the other problem is the company it might be impossible to make that sort of sales to even exit at the rate that you raised that last round of investment at. So that is an often underlooked problem when raising money, especially when sexy things like AI, for instance, is a great example. Your options get limited. You're very quickly going to have to get to an IPO route, and you're very quickly going to have to make as many sales as you possibly can to have some sort of, something to sell.
So how do you get the
Hopefully that's
balance
helpful.
right? Because we talked about almost 2 ends of a spectrum. One is undervaluing and one is overvaluing. So how do you are there any signs that you look for to go, yeah, I've got that about right? Or is there a way you
100%.
approach the forecasting?
You be honest on your sales. It's about revenue. I mean, especially if it's tech, your cost of sales are important because you got to be able to show that it's scalable, and that's your cost of sales. So your server costs, your any other technology costs, let's say if it's a tech company to grow it, you've got to be able to demonstrate that there's a margin to play with to hire a team and everything else, and that you can reduce those as you grow or keep them flat. The problem that you're sort of below GP margins, your administration costs and all the rest of that. That at an early stage company, yes, we want to get profitable as quick as possible because then you can access debt and other types of money. And that is definitely the best way to go ever, is to get yourself to raising debt as quick as possible. Because it's easy to use, you can grow the company quicker and you don't have to give away any more equity. So that's definitely where you want to try to get to. But forgetting that, the main driver for valuations is your ARR. So your annualized recurring revenue. So take your month revenue times it by 12. There you go. That's your ARR. Just so people who don't know. I hate it when people talk about jargon and like different abbreviations, assuming everyone knows what we're talking about. But yeah, so that and SaaS businesses, this is incredibly important as well because it's your recurring revenue, right? It's the stuff that's going to come in hopefully month to month, and you have churn of some customers that's important to sort of show as well. But the main thing is how much money you got coming in the door times that by 12. And if you're looking at the American markets, so last month, let's say, I work with a group called Silver Peak, great consultancy, and they send out, and I recommend any CFO, I'm not formally recommending their services, but signing up to their mailing list. They have a wonderful mail out every quarter that talks about the markets. So it shows how much people are paying times multiple of ARR and EBITDA for exits in different regions around the world. Really interesting stuff. Because at the end of the day, don't forget, our job is to sell our companies, right? That's the CFO's job. It's scale ups. If we don't sell our businesses, investors don't make their money, right? It's the nuts and bolts of it. Anyway, so America at the moment are paying between 7 and 8 times for a software company of your ARR.
ARR or EBITDA?
ARR. EBITDA is only like yeah. So ARR was a lot more easier to get to at this sort of scale up phase because most people are loss making and are burning cash. So your ARR is really important. So what I say to people, to getting to the point, when you're doing your forecasts, be absolutely realistic to yourself at what you think you could actually achieve. Don't just pull that number out your bum and think this is great. It's a good number. They're going to invest in that because it's a good number. Be honest with yourself. Be really honest and look at competitors, look at other people. And look, it's better to say to an investor, I will make you £100,000 MRR by the end of the first year and you do 150, rather than saying I'm going to do 150 and only achieving 75. You will be a failure. You're much better to say 50, make them happy, and then do 75. Rather than say 75 and do 50. So kind of got my analogy mixed up, but you get the point. It's like always undersay what you can actually think you can do, because then you're always going to be the golden boy or girl. But if you do the other, then you're not. So think realistic of what you would do, times that by, and if it's too low a valuation in your head for the money you need, then be clever on how you raise your next round. Don't just, if you need 2 million to scale the company, right? Then go in and say, I need $1 million now at a valuation of 15 million. That's because this is what I believe I'll hit. Now, what I want from you is if I hit that, I want you to commit to another $1 million at this valuation. So I am pre-dogging what I want. I am going in there and saying, I'm going to need another $1 million. I need 2. All right. But one's going to last me a year and I'm going to get to here. If I get to there, that'll increase the value of the company to this. Then I want you to pay that. I'm being reasonable. They can walk away if I don't hit it, but I'm being reasonable of what I think I can achieve.
So as a CFO, there's obviously you in this conversation, but there's also the founder. And that can sometimes be a challenge, almost getting founder and investor on the same page. So, like, have you got any tips or tricks for, I guess, managing founder expectations, around what they think they can achieve, particularly if they've got this huge vision for how to get there?
Listen, never dismiss. Always listen to the founder. Never belittle the founder. Never use language that belittles the founder. Never make them feel like they know nothing, because the truth is they know more about their product than we will ever know, because it's their product and they've achieved what they've achieved to date, and we come in without us. So the CFO who comes in and pretends they know everything and has a massive ego and attitude is never going to really get too far. But people do things from people they like. Right? If you come in and throw your weight around and your ego and pretend that you're just God's gift to finance, it may work a bit, and narcissists always get on really well in this world. especially as founders normally. But like it will potentially work. But the truth is, it won't help scale the company, and your time will probably not last too long. They know what they know. They know more than you know in terms of the way the business works. Our job is to take what they do and put that in some sort of realism, and it's making them understand. I always say, look, my job, I will say to a founder, I think you should raise at this valuation because of A, B, and C. And they'll say, no, I want this valuation. And then I'll say, okay, just to understand, if you rose at that valuation, these are the things that could happen. This. This would be a big issue in the future, and we want to scale further, and it'd be disadvantage. And they'll say, no, I don't want to. I really want to do this. And I'm like, are you sure you want to do this? This is crazy. And if they said yes, my job changes. My job then, they're the boss. My job is to take what they want and to do the best bloody job at it that I can. That's my job then. I'm going to take that and I'm going to turn that into the best opportunity I can and de-risk that as best as I can, and find and pre-think of ways to solve problems that are going to go wrong in the next 4 years before they do. That's my job. And it's not to sit there and argue and then say, I told you so. It's to get on board. And even if I don't think it's right, it doesn't matter. I expressed myself. I communicated to them how I felt. I always put it in writing as well. I've done everything in my power. Just you never know. It always comes in handy sometimes. But you should have told me that. Yes, I did. But it's not about if it ever came to that. But the idea is you're meant to be their number two, and you can lead a horse to water. If it doesn't want to drink, that's fine, but you can't just leave it there. You still got to walk with it, and you still got to live with it. And you don't have an ego and go, oh, I'm leaving, because you shouldn't. If you're going to leave the job at that point, you shouldn't have taken the job in the first place. I'm very particular now as I'm getting more senior, the people I work with as well. I choose the founders I work with now more than I used to. Now I would much prefer to go home happy rather than going home feeling bullied and miserable.
Yeah, and I guess last question for today. So what are the 3 questions you would ask a founder to figure out if they're the right fit for you as a CFO?
Oh, I love the fact you just came out with that on the spot. I feel like it's a job interview. This is great. What were the questions I would founder? Do you trust me? No. Very
You've
good
been
question.
reading your preparation script, haven't you?
Hang on, give me a minute. This is what I learned. This is what I learned. This is what I learned. All right. So no, it's a good question. I'm trying to think back now. It's been a couple of years now since I've now I do full-time gigs. I tend to stay with the company a lot longer than I used to. But back in the day, I think one of the things I would always talk about is on my initial call, I always talk through the business with the founder when I first meet them. And the big thing for me is I ask lots and lots and lots of questions, and I challenge them, not directly challenge them, but I ask questions about, have you thought about doing it? Have you guys ever thought about doing it this way or that way? I did talk, there was someone I was with, there was someone, I'll leave nameless, of course, but recently, and this thing actually happened. It was a founder. I was actually just giving some mentoring to this person, and I was working out whether I would donate any more time to help this person. And I was saying to them, oh, well, such and such, he was trying to raise money. And I was saying to him, your product will struggle to raise money because it was really niche. And I said, that's fine. And you can raise money on it, but it's still very, very niche. So have you thought about diversifying the product into some of these different areas that had a bigger market saturation in that? And he's like, no, I won't do that. I'll be selling myself out. I'm just going to do this. And I thought, oh, okay. And then I said, well, have you thought about doing A, B, and C? There was one thing, I can't remember. It was like an Innovate UK grant. It was a grant funding he was going for at one point. And I said, okay, well, make sure you stick this in that application because I know, because of other people I've raised this money for, that if you stick that in, you get a much higher chance of success because of this, and this. And he was like, I know what I'm doing or something, like really dismissive. And I said,
Mhm.
okay, fine, I'll leave you to it. That's fine. Um, and then last bit was a lack of appreciation. So once I did this and helped them with this, um, it was kind of like, I think I can't remember exactly what it was, but the the feeling that there was no value in the advice that I was giving that was financially worth something to him. I was just mentoring. I didn't want anything financially, but he did say he would give options, and I said, great, send me an options contract, and then I'll happily help you further. And then it's like, oh, okay, we haven't done anything yet. And I thought, you know what? You're obviously not that interested. You're not listening to a word that I have to say. You don't want you holding fast to your ideas, which is fine if I was offering something that was drastic, but you're trying to raise money and I know you can't. And you don't want to take my advice. And funny enough, he applied for that grant and he didn't get it because he didn't include the things that I told him to include. That was his feedback. And he told me this, and I sort of smiled to myself and thought, I'd say I told you so, but I smiled to myself. And then anytime he now calls up wanting advice, I just don't answer. And I have no time for him because what's the point of wasting my very precious limited time on someone who won't listen? And I think that's a big thing I look for in CFOs is someone who would take my advice on and listen. Marcus, the current CEO, that's the one thing I respect the most about him is he has, he definitely, we don't always have the same opinion on things, but he listens and he listens to his key staff around him. He takes on our advice. He doesn't sit there and ever pretend he knows more than we do in our areas of expertise. And I think that's why with UBIO, we're scaling, we're doubling every year in size. We're doing great guns because he listens and because he is able to work with all the C-suite as a team to help grow and scale the company, and we respect him for that. And I think that's the secret of that scaling and growth is that working as a team. I've worked for enough founders now who don't want to listen, and you never end up going anywhere. And as a CFO, you're only going to have so many opportunities of getting exits in before you're getting old. So if it takes 2 or 3 years per exit, you want to make more than a couple of million quid in your life, you're going to have a number of exits under your belt. So you can't just hang around and work for a company that's not going to go anywhere and eventually die because the founder won't listen to anyone. It's
So
a
I think
sad
what you're
truth.
saying, yeah, I think what you're saying there is that what you're looking for is finding a way to figure out can they take advice and feedback on board. So figuring out, and I love that suggestion, looking at how they maybe work with their other team members,
Hmm.
understanding how they talk and how they take things on board there.
Yeah.
We talked about do they actually value the advice that a CFO and do they actually understand what a CFO can do and bring to the
But that
table?
that is a huge thing. So many people think CFOs, you do the accounts, yeah? And you're like, no, 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 it's not what CFOs do. CFOs do the strategy. We grow and scale companies. That's what we do. Yes, we're in charge of the finances. That's fine. That's just a part of what we do. We are the grower and the scalers. We're the ones who sit there next to you and have to sit there every single day. Um, and just quickly, the other bit of advice, life is too short to work with narcissists.
Mhm.
Um, especially in scale up techs, and I've worked for a number of narcissists in my career previously. People who are like proper ones. I mean, I'm married to a psychiatrist, so I know the definition quite well, but the vulnerable and the non-vulnerable narcissists, where everyone hates me, it's all about me, and everything is horrible, and we don't succeed because everyone's against me, and the board hates me, and everyone hates me. You're never going to get anywhere because it's all going to be about them. And even if it's exhausting. It's just beyond exhausting. And then the other ones are the ones who are narcissistic and want to throw you off a roof of a building, which I've had once before, and don't ever want to listen to anything you have to say. And you have to play everything going, I know you know more than I do. I know you're the best in the world. Have you thought of this before? I'm sure you thought of it before, but just in case you haven't, have you thought of this? I ran a workshop a little while ago on communicating to narcissist founders, and it was really popular. And that's literally what we talked about is using my wife's work with as a psychiatrist mixed with my acting stuff to work on how as finance people we can communicate to those narcissistic founders who don't want to listen to us or take what we have on board, and also importantly how to emotionally protect ourselves because it is exhausting and it's bullying working for narcissists. So yeah, don't work for a narcissist.
And I
Don't work for
think
Elon
that is
Musk.
the topic for the next podcast.
Oh, I love it. I've been invited back already.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Brad. The amount of stuff we've covered in this session has been amazing. Everything from fundraising to love languages to top tips for avoiding narcissistic founders. So what a ride. Okay. I knew it was going to be a great podcast when we started, and it definitely was. So to our listeners, if you have questions you feel like you would like to ask Brad, particularly on the topic of narcissistic founders, I will happily do. I think that would make a great podcast. But that will be the next one. I'd love
I
to
like
hear
it.
them. If you've enjoyed this podcast and definitely want me to bring Brad back, then let me know, and we'll try and make that happen. So thank you so much, Brad, for joining me, and thank you to our listeners for listening. And we'll see you next time on the CFO podcast.
Hey Google, what's the best accounting software for my business? Give it a couple of years, and I bet you she'll be able to answer you pretty accurately. But for now, it's still one of the few questions Google can't give you an answer for. But we can. Take our free quiz and find out which Sage product is the right fit for your business. Just head to itassolutions.co.uk.